what happened to the Genesis colony ship? I mean, actually, like beneath the surface. Did anyone try to stop the spread of the corruption? We know that Rockwell took it over and that one of the rings is corrupted, but how did it actually get to become this way, and who was involved? Hey everyone, my name is Ned, and in this video, I'd like to go over what we know after reading all of both Nida and Gabriel's notes on Genesis 2. If you end up liking this video, please do give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more of this kind of content. So, without further ado, let's get right into it. To begin, let's start with Nida. She was one of the crew members on the ship and was also a dirt scientist. Her job was to study the soil health of the environments on board. She was a fairly younger woman and one that never actually set foot on Earth. Nida lived on the colony ship her whole life, working as a second-class agricultural engineer on a team headed by project manager Perry Mullen. Nida wondered what it must have been like for those who actually lived on a planet, and she really seemed to dislike being on a ship her whole life. In her free time, she played around with creating different worlds and scenarios within the margins of the Genesis simulation. One day, Nida found a bizarre occurrence in the main simulation, some kind of transhuman interference found within the code. As far as I've been able to tell, transhumans are just another way of saying Homo Deus, since they seem to be used interchangeably by Nida, though in actuality transhumans appeared to be less powerful than Homo Deus. Nonetheless, Nida finds the record of the disturbance in the form of a new robotic AI that the simulation did not have to begin with. Shortly after discovering the AI, Nida confronted it and found it to be friendly. It told her its name, HLNA, and explained that it was created by a Homo Deus. After asking if it had been on the ship the whole time, HLNA explained that it had only been there for the past 3,000 cycles or so, meaning roughly 8 years if we assume a cycle is a full day-night cycle. To Nida's surprise, this would certainly mean 8 years is hardly a dent in the amount of time the ship had been cruising through space. This suggests what Helena's fate may have been, as well as how HLNA came into existence, and it also implies how Rockwell got on the ship. Shortly after discovering HLNA, Nida and the rest of the crew began to find issues in the real-world colony ship appearing. At first, Nida started to think they were caused by HLNA, but she wasn't entirely sure. Certain genetic makeup was being outright changed, and it was happening on only one of the rings, the front one. The crew members attempted to stop the corruption, but many died in the process. Nida wasn't allowed to help because she thought the others just saw her as a kid, but she herself considered the possibility that the rings and biomes may have to be separated. One of the primary threats in the corrupting ring was the shadow main species, which roamed the land, tearing apart any crew members trying to contain the area. Thus, it was starting to get pretty bad. Nida was sick of just waiting around for the disaster to get worse, so out of curiosity, she slipped into the tunnels and found her way into the frontal ring to at least see what it looked like. It was completely changed, as the plants and animals were becoming severely mutated to a point of being even lethal. After getting back to Eden safely without contaminating it, Nida was seriously shook up from that experience. She mentioned how her whole life as a simulation building enthusiast, making worlds to get lost in through the Genesis simulation, didn't at all prepare her for real-life alien scenarios, like the one that was practically happening in the front ring. Luckily, Nida was able to bring back samples for the project manager, Perry, allowing them to test what was happening on a molecular level. From examining the materials, Nida discovered that the creatures cropping up in the frontal ring appeared to be designed to set up a perimeter defense, defending something that which she didn't yet know. She also discovered traces of raw element directly incorporated into the living, mutated tissue, which was a very bad sign. At this point, the crew was talking about seriously detaching the ring from the ship in an attempt to prevent the spread of the corruption, and Nida still considered the fact that a transhuman force may be causing all of this to happen, which makes sense. HLNA cropped up right when everything started to get bad, so it certainly doesn't paint a good picture for the AI. In a desperate attempt to do something, Nida managed to track down HLNA in the simulation and was able to get something out of it. HLNA mentioned that the colonists were waking up prematurely, and that its creator, the transhuman, or Homo Deus, was now gone. This would line up with Homo Deus Helena not being able to stay in the simulation for long. After exiting the simulation with that in mind, Nida was still confused and sure enough discovered that colonists were waking up around the ship. Unfortunately, Nida lost contact with the rest of her crewmates, and the progress on the ring separation wasn't going too great. Eventually, Nida discovered some documentation on the ring separation procedure and considered the possibility of doing it herself to effectively save humanity from the disaster. This was all she could really do at the time, stuck underground and hiding, as she hoped many of her other crewmates were also doing. While staying safe, Nida discovered through surveillance footage a person on the topside, just alive and awake. Someone who may have been a colonist, or in other words, one of the survivors meant to be in the Genesis simulation until the ship found a new planet to touch down on. This meant that the survivor she was seeing wasn't supposed to be awake, let alone on the surface. So Nida attempted to contact the colonist through her helmet visor to hopefully rescue them and get them underground where it was safer. The colonist was receptive and went into the tunnels to meet Nida. After taking off their helmet and introducing themselves, the colonist was shown to be a man named Gabriel, a supposed prospector from the gold rush era of 1849 in California. They became familiar with each other after some time, and Gabriel learned about the ship, where they were, and what their situation was, and he was particularly intrigued by the rocks that made up their area, as well as the strider creatures which could help with excavation. Since meeting Gabriel, Nida found that something was off about him, and this was probably rooted in the fact that he was a combination of two different people, thus two different personalities shoved into one body. He was simultaneously a gold prospector from America and an occultist from the Roman Principate, giving him a dangerous side which probably bled through and was off-putting for Nida, though she knew nothing about this specifically at the time. Gabriel discovered that Nida had a piece of element which fascinated him. In his first realization of his split personality, Gabriel had a dream the following night that he was forging a blade out of Nida's element, but he didn't recognize himself doing it, nor the place he was in, which sent him down a path of questioning who he was. Gabriel and Nida then went on to try taming striders to perhaps eventually use in saving the frontal ring. While he was learning how to use the striders for mining purposes, Gabriel discovered a piece of element and pocketed it without Nida realizing. After dreaming more about his past life as an occultist, Gabriel was beginning to fall further out of touch with reality, which wasn't helped by the fact that Nida freaked him out by showing him one of her simulations, meant to actually calm him down, but also by the fact that he heard a voice. The same voice which had originally woken him up from the Genesis simulation in the beginning, the voice of Rockwell. This prompted him to steal a strider and flee from Nida, as he no longer cared to help her. After time alone, Gabriel came to the conclusion that he didn't care for the element and wanted to find purpose. He later went back to find Nida and help her fight such an imposing force as what she had described in the front ring. After catching up with Nida right as she was opening the gate to the ring, he tried to apologize but got no response since Nida didn't care for his help anymore. After they made it through the tunnels and to the next ring over, they entered into the garden. Almost immediately, they found numerous corpses of Nida's crewmates, killed and splayed across the area almost as effigies, likely as Gabriel suspected to warn off anyone trying to enter into the biome. Nida was understandably devastated from witnessing this, and Gabriel helped her bury them. He was able to identify with her rage that soon followed, a rage to take back the ring, since in his past life as a gold prospector, outsiders similarly came to take his own land and then his life. The duo continued onward, though Nida was still refusing to speak to Gabriel. He wanted to know what they were going to do because things were looking really hopeless. Then they were attacked by Shadowmanes, which the Striders were able to hold off only until the last second as Nida dug into a small area with a hatch frame that allowed the two to escape just before the Shadowmanes got to them. The hatch happened to lead them into a slippery slope of flesh as they fell deep underground within the ship. After passing out and having more dreams of his occultist life, Gabriel awoke near Nida in a large chamber that was composed of flesh, eyes, and teeth. They found themselves right in the middle of Rockwell's chamber itself. Rockwell asked the two survivors to aid him in collecting more element, to act as his servants, and when they refused, he attempted to force them anyway. Gabriel was taken, and in his last moments, he threw Nida his element-shaped knife in the hopes that she would survive and make it out. What happens after that is purely based on my own theories, but I assume that Nida then took the knife and ran as fast as she could to a command center in order to separate the rings and potentially eject the corrupted one. We know this because in the end boss fight, HLNA sort of talks a little bit about that, about how one of the crew members set up an ejection sequence, exactly like the one that she described. Unfortunately, she wasn't able to finalize the procedure and only prepped the sequence to be used. After that, Nida may have been killed or she escaped, but unfortunately we don't know either way. So that was it. That's effectively the stories of Nida and Gabriel and how they interact with HLNA as well as Rockwell. I've been wanting to make this video for a while, at least to sum up the story of Genesis 2, since I already went through and made videos on the survivors, Rockwell, HLNA, and Santiago. I really hope that you liked the summary and learned something from it. Stay tuned for my very first episode of my very long-term ARK playthrough that I've been doing for months at this point, Journey's Core, coming next week, along with the evolution guides and the aberration survival stories in the coming months. I'll have more to share on that soon. If you like this video, again, be sure to give it a like, subscribe for more, and in any case, thanks again so much for watching, and good luck, survivors.